Welcome to the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast, presented by the Fantasy Football World Championship, home to the industry's most accurate rankings.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Full-Time Fantasy Football Podcast, recording today, July 9th, Wednesday. And with me, I'm your host, Adam Krautwurst, and with me, Jody Smith, Mr. Full-Time himself. Had a pretty good year last year. The current number 2 ranking in the world for fantasy football rankings. Welcome to the show, Jody. What's going on, bro?
Just the usual, man. We're neck deep in draft prep and rankings and all that now because we've got training camp coming up in a couple of weeks. And after you and I, all the work we put on the magazine, you just go straight into regular season routine now. So
for sure, yeah. And our intro talks about how we had number 1 ranking in 2021. And to kind of follow that up a couple of years later with, I think it was you and Billy rocking that out, and then coming back a couple of years later with you getting the number 2 overall ranking in Fantasy Pros. For people who don't understand, that's like the top expert. That's like your main event. That's your, Super Bowl is those rankings, and to come in second, it's really good. Congratulations, dude.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Billy won was it 21?
Yeah,
I finished 8th that year, and then I fell off a little bit in 22. And then last year I was top 10, and then highest I've ever finished was this one in 22. I thought as the season was progressing, I thought I was doing pretty well. Like I can't come up with a formula, but I knew there was. It's those it's the mid to late round guys. That's where I stand out when it comes to doing the Fantasy Pros is. Nailing those guys, running backs ranked 25 to 50. That's the range where, it's easy to pick the top 5, top 10 guys. But, and it's like we were talking about, if I hadn't have overranked Tyreek Hill, which definitely won't do this year, but that was the difference between first and second.
That's it, man. Just that small time. Hey, nailing those running backs in the 25 to 50 range is big in helping players win fantasy football championships, because that's where you win, where you get those late round flyers, those players that maybe people aren't drafting, they're drafting really late. Those are the league winner type picks, right?
Yeah, that's it. And with last year with running back, we actually had this unusual percentage of running backs that stayed healthy, where normally at the top of drafts, the 0 RB club, we're always trying to pick the wide receivers because they tend to stay healthier. But last year we had some of the elite wideouts. Cooper Kupp was drafted pretty early and missed time. Puka Nacua missed time. Nico Collins ended up missing time. You had some of the strong wide receivers.
Chris Godwin, yeah.
Well, Chris Godwin was a guy that we were all here at Full-Time Fantasy extremely high on. I love that they were moving him back into the slot, and he was. I had him on just about every roster last year. So right up until week 7, we're smooth sailing along, getting. He was wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 in points per game at the time, and then he went down. But last year running backs tend to stay healthy. So unusually high percentage of running backs stayed healthy last year, which is why you see, us in this industry, you always stake with the recency bias. So now you have pretty much the first round is, loaded with running backs. So, we'll see what happens back years.
Yeah. Not only that, the guys that stayed healthy, the Alvin Kamaras, the Joe Mixons, the Derrick Henrys, all the kind of the older guys.
James Conner finally, I think he missed the season finale, something like that. But when you draft James Conner, he's going to miss 1 or 2 games, but
it was crazy. Everybody stayed healthy. So it was tough. It was a tough year for the 0 hero RB crowd. But yeah, the other thing you said you were working on the magazine, I got my copy right here.
Nice. Yeah.
The Pro Forecast 36th season. Congratulations on that. Of course, Josh Daddy Allen on the cover. I got to contribute to this. That was really cool. I did a high stakes article. I did a couple receiver rankings and stuff. And so that was cool. to be a part of that, and have that as like a little throw that on the coffee table as a little convo starter, especially with Josh Allen on the cover of that. But
yeah, I bought a couple copies the other day because my mom always wants to have a copy.
That's right.
And like the local grocery stores, they don't even carry magazines anymore. I guess that's something that's fading. Like, when we were growing up, the newspaper was integral for keeping up with news and all that kind of stuff. And now you don't even see them anymore. And now I guess magazines are next.
If you're in the Northeast, Wegmans has them for sure, and also Barnes and Noble. So those are the two main spots you'll find them. But one of the articles I do want to talk about today, not in the magazine, but on the FullTime Fantasy website, is the running back regression article that you came up with, which I think these, and then we're going to get into kind of your running back rankings and stuff, but I think these articles are very important to kind of reset your brain as to kind of what happened the year before, what leads to regression. What are the things that, there was a number a couple of years ago where, hey, if this running back got 300, I'm making this up, I forget what the number was, but it was like 340 carry or touches or more, the next year he plummeted, no matter how good his season was. Think back to the Larry Johnsons of the world, the Priest Holmes of the world, like all these guys that took all these carries, and then the next year they would just kind of really didn't die off. So this goes into that, all that type of stuff. So why don't you talk us kind of through the article and what you kind of came out of it?
Yeah, you're referring to I believe it was Gary Davenport who originally came up with what's called the curse of 370, and that's 370. I don't know if it's carries or touches for a running back, but another figure that's more prominent seems to be 400 plus touches, because you mentioned Priest Holmes, Larry Johnson are both guys that kind of fell apart after topping that. And let's not forget Le'Veon Bell. He had a season where he was way up there over 400, and he didn't even play the next year. Now that was for different, various reasons, but still, it's obviously when people were doing their drafts or whatnot, you're spending the top 3 pick on Le'Veon Bell because he was so good, but and then came back and just didn't play next year. But those are things that I'd been thinking about for a while, plus, Gary's article, he updated it this year, and I had kind of read it and was thinking, what, another thing I have noticed over the year is it seems like when a running back leads the league in rushing, that the next year there's a huge huge decline. And so I just decided to track it. And, in these days, you could argue amount of time something relevant, but I decided, what, let's go back a full 25 years. That way there's just a huge collection of data, and you're basically covering 2 completely different eras of football, whereas into that late 90s when running backs dominated everything, and then the receivers became more prominent. But yeah, it was very telling, just how often running backs are falling off. In that article, I think it was 3 running backs in the last 25 years that led the league in carries were either as good or better the next year. So 3 out of 25. The average drop off was 37%. It was just huge, and
that's huge.
It is huge, and you look at various reasons, but I think it just comes down to what stood out to me is again with the 400 touches, the curse of 370 it's just wear and tear. It's a lot to ask for, and in these days, another wrinkle thrown into it is that players have less reps in the preseason. And you could argue that's good or that's bad, but they have more punishment, more carries, more usage, more touches in the regular season. And then you have expanded playoffs now. So all in all, I don't know how relevant it is for people, but my takeaway from this was that it's not. It almost becomes factual that you have to be concerned for players that take on that kind of usage. And looking at what Saquon Barkley did last year, 482 total touches when you include the postseason. And remember, he sat out the regular season finale, so it would have been higher. 482 touches last year when you throw in the Super Bowl run. So huge concern. I think I love Saquon Barkley. He's a great player, great dude. But and at one point, this year do you get concerned? You know, a lot of people are taking him first overall. I prefer Bijan, and I would take Jahmyr Gibbs before I take Barkley. But, you know, how far can you drop him? If you're concerned, or if you feel like I'm going to sell high, whatever. I mean, me personally, it comes down to I couldn't take Barkley any lower than, you know, if you really want to gamble, you could say 6. You know, you could take Devin Achane, Derrick Henry, and Christian McCaffrey if you're willing to, you know, take that risk. I guess you could all argue maybe you could take those guys ahead of Barkley, but I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Jody, because you know you're talking about the 3 running backs. That was 2002 Priest Holmes. That was 2009 Adrian Peterson, and 2020 Derrick Henry were the 3 guys that got better the following year after leading the league in rushing. Every other rushing leader for the last 25 years has gotten worse. You said an average of 38%, and you can talk yourself into it. Like right now, it's like, you know, Saquon Barkley. Well, how do we not take Saquon in the top 5? You take him for this reason and that reason, good offense, good player, this, that, and the third. But if you go back to every single player on this list, Adrian Peterson, Zeke Elliott, Maurice Jones-Drew, Arian Foster, Chris Johnson, you can make the cases for all those guys every year on why I have to take them in the top 5. But history shows you that these rushing leaders, you know, 22 out of 25 seasons have plummeted the following season. And it's because, well, you could say, oh, well, this guy tore his ACL. Well, yeah, well, that can lead from wear and tear of the year before, you know? So it's are you kind of blindly just looking at it and going, yeah, I'm passing on this guy because, you know, can we predict injuries? No, but we can look at data from the last 25 years ago. 22 out of those 25 guys plummeted the following year, and there's other options. No one's forcing you to take him. Like you said, you could take a Gibbs. You could take a stud receiver. A lot of these leagues, FF to WC, you got to start 3 receivers. Receivers are very valuable. Take a receiver. This year, the receivers are loaded in the first round. So this article is so good. You talk about, you know, what are the contributing factors for success? Health, winning team, age, and skill set, right? So you kind of want to factor those things in. Talk to me a little bit about like the age distribution, you know, like what kind of ages that it falls in where you're finding these kind of smash rushing seasons.
Right. Well, you've only had 2 players in the last 25 years that were age 29 or older that managed to even lead the league in rushing. So you're talking about, this is a young man's game, you know, which makes sense. There's Zeke Elliott is the only player that was below 22 that was able to do so. But overall, 70% of running backs are in their prime are between the age of 24 and 28. That's what you're coming up with. So when I'm looking at, you know, potential candidates to lead the league in rushing this year, that's the wheelhouse you're looking at. Guys that are in there that have acclimated to the league a little bit. Now, of course, you know, it's not unusual to see the occasional rookie come up. We had Edgerrin James managed to lead the league as a rookie.
I think his first 2 seasons he led the league in rushing, I think.
Yeah, he did, and then he had that massive knee injury. But it's not unusual to see a rookie lead the league in rushing. And, you know, Ashton Genty, if you're looking at if he's able to carry over his success, he's a candidate that could do that. But, you know, I'm more looking at those players that are in their prime years. And, you know, like I said, that makes sense. But, you know, Barkley, he's approaching the latter end of that. And not to mention, you know, just hit on Barkley that he's actually missed multiple games with injury 4 out of 7 years. So I mean, he only missed 1 game last year, and he was healthy. You know, that was him making a team first decision to not go for that NFL record. So again, that to me, that's more credit to just what a great player he is. But that's what I'm looking for. You know, and in that article, I identified a few targets that stood out as players that could potentially lead the league in rushing, that check those boxes of 3-down skill set, that are in a offense, preferably a winning team, and that are in that age gap there. And Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, obviously a couple of guys that stand out and check those boxes. But another one that kind of stood out was, I felt like he's a long shot because he can't stay healthy. Jonathan Taylor, that's another guy that is potential candidate there.
Yeah, no, those are all good ones. Those are at the scroll on to the end of the article. You talk about that. So yeah, I really think those are some good things to kind of look at. Like, hey, how do we apply this, and who are the guys that kind of fill into those situations there? So yeah, really great article, everybody. Check that out. Kind of just a little food for thought when you're kind of looking through your guys, or maybe using it as tiebreakers between two players like a Saquon and a Bijan, or a Saquon and a Gibbs, or something like that. So, but yeah, we want to talk a little bit more about running backs today. Kind of get into your running back rankings maybe a little bit. So I guess we'll just start with number one, and then I'll kind of go through it from there. Who do you got? We're talking about Saquon. I'm talking about Bijan, Gibbs. Who do you have, Jody, as your number one running back this year?
Bijan Robinson. It's a pretty easy 101 for me now. I regret that my Scott Fishbowl draft is coming up Saturday, and at the time I originally signed up for the 11th spot, and then I moved to 6, and now I kind of regret it. So as I've seen the way the things are playing out, there's running backs. I wish I had kind of waited and maybe take a stab something like a Christian McCaffrey, Trey McBride thing there at the end of the first, but that's not going to happen because generally in drafts, I like to be in the middle because I don't like those long runs, in particular in a format like Scott Fishbowl that's third round reversal. But point being that Bijan Robinson is easily my 101, and I'm not going to get a chance to get him there at 6, which I think what I was getting at. I can't remember the numbers right in front of me, but when I was researching, for the magazine and all that, I looked back at when the Falcons gave the offense over to Michael Penix there. Bijan went absolutely crazy at the end of the year. He had something like, in the final 3 games, he was averaged like something like 150 scrimmage yards and scored 6 touchdowns in the final 3 games. Now, of course, don't necessarily expect that to carry over, but he checks all the boxes that I'm looking for. In particular, looking back during my research for this article, he's got the 3-down skill set. He's on a roster that, arguably is a competitive team. It's a winnable division. For years, NFC South has been that one division that seemed to have until this recent run by the Bucs, they had a new winner. It seemed like every year, like whoever was in 4th would win it the next year. And it was a cyclical thing for a long time there. Yep. I feel like the Falcons can compete in that division, and I just like Robinson. He's trending, he's a 3rd round breakout candidate. He's 3-down skill set. He's been healthy both years in the league, and good offensive line. I mean, he checks all the boxes for me for a guy that it could be the next candidate to regress after leading the league in rushing next year.
Yeah, there you go. Oh God, we're already looking at 2027. But yeah, no, you're right. I think he like you said, age, talent, team, like you said, they're going to compete to win that division. Depends on Penix, the whole offense, but I think Bijan could definitely be the guy there. You mentioned Gibbs. We talked about Barkley a little bit. Do you have a tier of running backs there? You got Bijan number 1. I know some people have Barkley and Gibbs a step below, or maybe Barkley in that tier and then Gibbs a step below. Kind of where do you have those guys ranked, Jody?
I feel like I've got Bijan and Gibbs as my elite top 2. I mean, you can argue where you want to take Jamar Chase. I guess it depends on your format, but that's my 2, and only for the reasons we've mentioned. I have Barkley like the top of the next year. Granted, right now as a hedge, Barkley's my running back 3, which is maybe 1 spot below where most people are taking him, but I would take Gibbs over Barkley just about everywhere. And in that second tier, Derrick Henry might be the safest bet in that tier, because after that I have Christian McCaffrey and Devin Achane. Both come with their risk. Achane, he's been a little dinged up, but overall, the biggest concern for Achane is what happens if Tua misses time, because his once teams didn't have to account for Tua last year, Achane was really saddled in, and his target production dipped, and people were able to shut down his run. If you knew that Tua was going to start every game, you're talking like a guy who's probably going to lead all running backs and targets and all that. So you could argue that he could jump up to RB3. And you remember last year I was off on Achane because I felt like he was being drafted at his ceiling.
Yes.
And I didn't see a lot of value in taking him. I mean, now, like I said, he's, RB5, RB6 range for me. I feel like it's safe. I mean, he came through. He stayed relatively healthy. I know he was a little bit dinged up at times, but it was the target load when he was in that offense. And now you're talking about with Miami getting rid of Jody Smith, who was easily his Miami's, you could argue, was their number 2 receiver last year with Waddle falling off like he did. A lot of potential target opportunities for Achane to continue to just rack it up. So
for sure.
And then of course Christian McCaffrey. Enough said about him. Obviously 101 upside, but extremely low risk extremely high risk with his worrisome injury history. And going back to the article, now Christian McCaffrey is getting towards the top of that age tier with a fairly checkered injury history in a San Francisco team that, it looks like, the 49ers fell off last year. I think they'll be more competitive this year, but you're talking about like a team that really sold a lot of their roster, and it looks like it's going to be a totally different team. So, yeah,
it's interesting. A couple of points I want to just talk about real quick. Yeah, Christian McCaffrey, not much to say there. Just isn't going to stay healthy. I've been playing fantasy football my entire life. I remember when handcuffing was like the thing to do. Now it's in vogue. Like, it's not plus EV. You don't handcuff your own guy. You handcuff somebody else's guy. And then if there's an injury to their guy, then you've got 2 RB1s. Listen, if you take Christian McCaffrey, you have to handcuff him. We don't necessarily know who it's going to be at. We got Garendo. We got the rookie. They might add somebody. So we'll kind of see on that. Gibbs, I do want to press in on. You talked about Achane, fine. We haven't talked about Genti yet, but Gibbs, I want to press in. So you have Gibbs as your RB2. Are you not worried about Montgomery taking away valuable touches? You're not worried about him not getting enough carries, enough touches to be that RB1 or RB2, I guess?
That's interesting. Now you've got with them losing Ben Johnson to Chicago, the new coordinator might not necessarily follow the same playbook, and he might look and realize, when David Montgomery was sidelined last year for what was that, 4 games, whatever it was, Gibbs was, 175 yards a game and scoring like 1.3 touchdowns a week, some, just crazy numbers. Morton might be like, that seems to be the way forward for us. So obviously Jahmyr Gibbs, which, for various reasons is one of the players I listed that is right up there with Bijan as being likely to lead the league in rushing last year. And let's not forget, in PPR scoring, Gibbs was the running back 1 last year. So for him to repeat that, all he's got to do is stay healthy, which, again, he's done a great job of doing that. He had 20 touchdowns last year. He's an absolute stud. And I wouldn't argue with anyone to decide, I'm going to go ahead and take Gibbs over Bijan at your 101. Great. Like I said, I have them both in an interchangeable as my tier. It's the drop off after those two where, a little bit more risk starts coming in.
Yeah, talk about Genti, kind of a little drop off, maybe the next tier down. I really like the Raiders is that they got Chip Kelly there, runs the fastest offense in sports. Their defense isn't going to be very good. They're going to be in some shootouts. I think they're a sneaky offense overall. We don't got to talk about the whole offense, but I think Genti might have an opportunity there to kind of press into maybe the RB1 overall.
It's funny. I was talking to my son the other day. This is his he really started kind of sat down with me one Sunday, I think at the end of 23, and was like, hey, this is kind of fun, this red zone, this is kind of crazy. He didn't really understand at the time, like why I wouldn't just watch the Texans game. And I said, ain't nobody got time for that, man. I got red zone to watch. But for the Sundays that he was off last year, that he wasn't working, he really enjoyed. He got his first fantasy football experience. He was in Scott Fish Bowl with us last year, and I got him into a dynasty league. And so he's becoming really, really excited about it. And I told him the other day, he was watching some YouTube videos, and I said, don't discount the Raiders as being a wild card contender this year. He goes, the Raiders. And I said, look, I understand, man, but listen, that division is, it's not overwhelmingly talented and deep. And the biggest additions to the Raiders, Chip Kelly, Pete Carroll, and not to mention they have a legitimate quarterback. There were times that the Raiders were, offensively competent last year. Jacoby Myers pretty good for a fantasy perspective. Brock Bowers, obviously record-setting as a rookie. And you know, they look good. They knocked off, what was it, the Patriots early in the year, and I think they were 2-2 or something like that. Competitive, but the lack of quarterback play. Well, that's kind of solved with Geno Smith. So overall, I think the Raiders can be competent. And obviously, last year they didn't have much at running back either. Now you have the word generational gets thrown around too much. I don't know that Ashton Jeanty is generational. He looked great at Boise State. You could argue what you want about Boise State's strength of schedule and all that, but you know, Jeanty, he checks a lot of boxes again. He's listed in my article. He checks the boxes of a player that could immediately come into the league and compete for leading the league in rushing. You don't have much on that roster that's going to take touches away from him, either as a receiver, as a running back. There's still concerns with the O-line. You know, not that long ago, the Raiders had a pretty strong offensive line, but it's just slowly gotten worse and worse. I know they made some changes, and we'll see how, you know, what Chip Kelly can get together schematically to, you know, overcome that weakness. But I like Jeanty just fine. He's in that, for me, I dropped him into my third tier running back. So he's RB7. I think Fantasy Pros consensus has him as RB4. It feels a little high for me because at that point you're taking Jeanty over Derrick Henry, and maybe that's just here. It's still fairly early in the offseason, and a lot of times, Adam, we see this early in the offseason, ADP is skewed because of so much dynasty outlook. So much people are focusing only on their dynasty startups and their rookies and all that. So you'll start to see things even out a little bit. So
For sure.
I don't know. I haven't had other than some fast draft. Great app, by the way. I've got some fast draft shares of Ashton Jeanty so far, but I haven't been able to get him hardly anywhere else. And he's someone who, like I said, my Scott Fishbowl draft coming up Saturday. He's on my short list of people I'm considering.
There you go. I wish Fast Draft is a great app. I wish I could draft right now, but they're not in New York, so they got pulled. So hopefully we get them back.
That's unfortunate.
But yeah, no, those are all great points on Jeanty. I'm hoping that the speed of the offense and the overall play amount, and there's no, you know, I love Jacoby Myers this year, but there's no alpha receiver outside of Bowers. So a lot of times those running backs are able to get a lot of that volume. Geno can keep the offense on the field.
Yeah,
so
let's see. Myers, what's his latest? I'm looking at how many years in a row. So looking at Fantasy Pros right now, Jacoby Myers ADP is 40. I don't understand that because how many years in a row has he been top 25? Last year he was wide receiver 24, and the Raiders should be significantly better. They got a massive upgrade at quarterback, and there's still not a lot after him. And
right, that's right. I mean,
the concern is, I think somebody tweeted this the other day that there's never been a 100 catch wide receiver in a Pete Carroll offense. Interesting.
Wow. Interesting. But listen, I think he'll be fine. Is it a peak? Yeah, they do like to run the ball for sure, which again goes back to Jeanty. Some other running backs I want to talk about, kind of some guys that have fallen out of the grace from last year, some maybe mid to late round targets. Breece Hall was a guy that was being taken in the top 4 overall last year. Now you can get him at the 3-4 turn in a lot of these drafts. I know. No Aaron Rodgers there. You know, they revamped everything. But I think drafting an old lineman in the first round, you know, everyone was worried. To me, I think what's happened with the Breece Hall ADP is they were all concerned. Aaron Glenn comes in, they're going to add another running back and do what they did in Detroit, and they didn't add another running back. And I think the ADP has just stayed low. You're the projections guy, Jody. You're the one that kind of does all this stuff and kind of tries to project carries and targets and all that. He can clearly catch the ball. Great receiver. I feel like he's the type of guy you should be targeting as a. He's my league winning pick in the 3-4 turn there. That a guy that could finish in the top 3 to 5 of running backs this season.
I'm a little more skeptical. You're looking at Brees Hall. I was looking at him earlier. His yards per carry, a lot of his metrics have declined each year he's been in the league. The Jets' offensive line is starting to look more and more like a mess this week. And it depends on coach speak. Aaron Glenn has repeatedly said that they plan on using multiple backs. Now, the offensive coordinator over there has told Brees Hall, hey, you need to be prepared to be a 3-down back and do everything. But again, Justin Fields, he has a tendency to push the ball to his tight ends more than your average quarterback. He's not a guy that, given a choice, Justin Fields, if he can dump a pass off to his running back or he just take off running, he generally tends to like to take off running. So, Brees Hall, I think there's a lot of upside with him, but I have him around like RB16, which is around what his ranking is, around his consensus. It's because, like I said, what if the coach speak is right? What if the Jets decide, what if Aaron Glenn was like, this whole multi-running back with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs thing here that Ben Johnson utilized right here on the same sideline with me, maybe that's a good idea. And we like what we have in the ancillary backs there in New York with Davis and who's the other guy?
Braylon Allen.
Yeah, Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. And let's not forget, last year, I think Braylon Allen was a top 40 running back for the season. Now he had a little bit of, higher touchdown
luck. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think he scored like 6 touchdowns on fairly limited touches, but I think there's risk with Brees Hall. He's a guy that I think the fantasy community was really excited about after some of the explosive plays and big plays that he had in his, early on in his career. But like I said, his overall, he's seems like he's fallen off a little bit. And he's somebody, Adam, like if there's, I think in every league, there's a person like you who just still remembers that and still loves him and is willing to take him. So it means that I probably am not going to roster him too much. See the upside, but like I said, there's it's a tricky situation because if they decide to implement this 3-back rotation or even a 2-back rotation, if Justin Fields stays healthy, it takes away not only from targets, but it takes away from rushes, in particular, valuable red zone snaps. So,
yeah, no, I totally get it. Braylon Allen wasn't very good. If you're, the same metrics that they use for Brees, Braylon Allen wasn't very good last year. A lot of his touchdowns too were scored kind of on these gimmicky, like wishbone formation type carries. And I mean, we don't want to have to get into the weeds there. I like stacking him, honestly. I mean, we're getting kind of macro big game theory, but I like stacking him with Fields as like a poor man's, I don't know, Eagles, right? With Jalen Hurts and Saquon, like you'll get pretty much every goal line carry will be in your backfield between Fields and Brees Hall.
If they both stay healthy, that's a way of getting yourself 2,500 rushing yards, 20 touchdowns maybe. They both stay healthy
on the ground. So, Brees Hall is a guy that I like taking, especially if I start receiver. I think he's a guy kind of in a group of other running backs there that you can take. And also, they're coming over from Detroit. Well, David Montgomery was a great running back before he even got to Detroit, I think. So I think, they were able to do that because Gibbs and Montgomery are both awesome. A lot of times you get these new coaches, they come in and they like actually feast their eyes on a guy like Brees Allen or a guy like Garrett Wilson. Like, oh, this guy's a stud. I think we're going to use him more than I thought. But all right, a guy that I've been lower on generally than consent. I want to hear kind of what your thoughts are. So James Cook, running back for the Bills, I think last year, he scored a ton of touchdowns. I think it was like 18 scores, and a lot of them were from distance. He wasn't getting goal line carries. He wasn't getting targets. I think his expected fantasy points was like 28th or something for running backs. Like he got super, super lucky, I guess is the word. And right now he's going again around like RB 13 or 14. Where do you have him, Jody? And is he a guy that you're kind of looking to target?
It's a guy that's tumbling down my rankings. You kind of hit the hit the nail there when you said the goal line looks. I was looking earlier. I believe he ranked 21st in running back carries inside the 5. Now, he did a good job punching those touchdowns in, but you talk about regression to the mean. The guy had 2 rushing touchdowns his first 2 years each, 2, and then last year 16. It's like hold up a second. You remember Jamal Williams in Detroit back in 2022? Just came out of nowhere, punched in a bunch of touchdowns, and then regressed. Now, I'm not going to say James Cook is going to do that, but you're talking. I don't see any way that he comes anywhere close to those touchdown numbers again. And keep in mind, Josh Allen is going to call his own number there on the majority of those inside the 5 carries. So it's very touchdowns are one of the more erratic things to predict when they're not coming near the stripe. When you're talking outside of 4 and 5 yards, it's very hard to project touchdowns. And not to mention a bigger concern is the potential contract impasse he's at with the team, because they've got backs behind him that they like just fine. Kind of makes you wonder. I believe he set out for OTAs, but I think the last thing I read is maybe he's going to show up here for camp, but still, I have a hard time thinking that the Bills are going to be willing to break the bank for a running back, because I'm not going to say that James Cook is replacement. James Cook is replacement level. He's better than that, but he's a guy that after finishing top 10 in fantasy production last year, remember roughly 40% of his total fantasy points came from touchdowns. So if you're expecting regression to the mean, let's just say, he goes down to, I don't know what, eight touchdowns, then you're talking about an RB2, which is about where I have him ranked. I think the update that I'm working on, which I'll publish this weekend, if you're new to not knowing who I am because of the rankings thing at Fantasy Pros, I'm working right now on a pretty massive rankings update, which will be published probably, I don't know, this weekend or maybe Monday at the latest. But James Cook is down from the mid-teens, RB 14, 13, 15 range. Now he's fallen down a couple of spots.
Yeah, I mean, you said it the best, for whatever 40-something%. Jody, he had 18 touchdowns last year, and he finished as RB8. Like like you think if you score 18 touchdowns, especially for the Buffalo Bills offense that scored, I think, the most points in football last season, you'd be at the number 1 running back, the number 2 running. No, he was RB8 with 18 scores. So it's going to go down for sure. And he's going to finish RB20. And so I faded him heavily last year. And even that, I faded him heavily. I didn't really have him anywhere. He finished with 18 scores, and he really didn't even kill me because he was RB8. So it's like, whatever. You can get other good players in the same range. He's kind of going in the same ranges as the Breece Halls and the Alvin Kamaras of the world. Like I'd much rather.
Yeah, I'm taking Kamara. I'm taking Ken Walker. Chase Brown. All these guys in that range over Breece Hall first. But that's cool if you want to go with Breece Hall, but definitely over Cook.
Yeah. For sure. What are some running backs, kind of as we kind of close it out here? Maybe a running back, Jody, that you're higher than consensus on your rankings, and maybe one that you're lower on. I'll give you one of mine while you kind of look that up. I really like a guy that I'm higher on just based on ADP and stuff is Tajay Spears. I think that we don't know what's going to happen in that backfield yet. And Tajay Spears was incredible. He was top 5 down the stretch last year for running backs in fantasy football. And I think there's a world where you draft him and he's got some contingent value right there, as maybe he's splitting carries with Tony Pollard. And then if you get an injury to Tony Pollard, who has a history of it, now you've got yourself a top 12 running back later on. I think he's very talented. He might even be as talented or more than Tony Pollard. So he's a guy going around, RB 40-ish range that I'd like taking for sure at his ADP, and a guy I've been looking to take. Who do you got, Jody? A guy that you think's undervalued?
Yeah, it's funny with Spears last year. One of my buddies, we're in a dynasty league, and he wanted to make a run for the title. So I'd already been eliminated, and so he traded for Jonathan Taylor. I told him, well, just give me the first and just you're going to cut somebody, so just give me Tajay Spears, and he did. And then, Spears ended up basically outscoring Taylor during the playoffs, and he ended up as a runner-up. Some of the guys I'm higher than consensus on. I just pulled it up here. DeAndre Swift, really interesting, very polarizing, I think, because you have experience with Swift with Ben Johnson in 2022. The aforementioned Jamal Williams season when Williams ran for 1,000 yards and something like 16 touchdowns. Swift wasn't used a lot that year, but he was a little hurt. But if you look at it, his metrics, that was the best, like as far as yards created and elusive, all these things, that was his best showing in the league. And he had a pretty healthy target share. Kind of assuming that Ben Johnson sticks with his 1-2 approach here in Chicago, you're talking about a significantly improved offensive line. So Swift as the 1A and Roschon Johnson as the 1B are both guys that I kind of like a little bit. I feel like Swift's ADP has risen a little bit. I'm not the only one there, but and there's some people that just outright feel like, hey, listen, DeAndre Swift's been in the league 5 years. If he was going to be special, we would know it now, which is true. I 100% get that, but I still feel like he's a pretty decent value. Looking at other guys, Travion Henderson, good pass catching ability. I don't see. I think the Patriots are wanting to really regret that contract that they gave Ramondre Stevenson. It should have another offensive line that should be better. The supporting cast should be better. I'm starting to come up on Henderson a little bit. Looking at my thing here. I'm not a hugely popular, higher than him on a consensus, but Ken Walker. Ken Walker, like I said, he's right outside RB1 territory for me. He was electric in that scheme last year when given an opportunity. I know a lot of people like to go with what's their number 2? Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah.
But you got to understand, when Ken Walker was healthy last year, Zach Charbonnet averaged 4 carries a game. The vast majority, obviously, of Zach Charbonnet's usage was because he was basically a workhorse, 3-down back when Walker was healthy. Walker, huge role in the passing game last year in Seattle. And I believe when he's healthy, he's going to be right up there, fringe RB1 type of producer. And Adam, you just talked about handcuff backs. It'll be hard, I think, to handcuff those two because, like I said, I'm actually lower in consensus on Zach Charbonnet just because I feel like this is Ken Walker's backfield. Now, of course, plenty of injury risk with him, but I feel like it's his backfield and
yes. Speaking of Ken Walker, I think they go to that wide zone scheme there now, and I think works great for his style. So I think it's going to be really good for him. I've never been a Kenneth Walker guy, but I am this year.
Looking here, look, let me get another one. I don't have any advanced data or stats off the top of my head. Why are we so low on Kareem Hunt? Given the opportunity last year, I know Pacheco was working his way back from a pretty major injury, but it seemed like they just trusted Kareem Hunt more down the stretch, in particular in short yardage. They quickly re-signed him in the offseason. Seems like everyone's forgotten. Kareem Hunt, he's down, around RB 59, RB 60, looking at ECR. And, at one point I had him, right behind Pacheco. I don't know, what Andy Reid's thinking in that backfield, obviously. And we know Pacheco has significantly more upside. But, looking at the usage down the stretch and in the playoffs, it just feels like they trusted Kareem Hunt more. So to me, he seems like he's a really solid value that late.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's one of those points with the Titans, just, hey, you don't really know yet, so just take the cheaper guy and see if it ends up playing out. You can get Kareem Hunt for almost free, essentially. In those, I do think the Chiefs like Pacheco better. I think because of he was coming off the injury. I don't think he was fully back yet, obviously, but I think time will tell during this offseason here. I think I have James Cook is the guy that I think is way overvalued, but a couple other kind of in the same vein. I also think, again, I don't have any advanced data for this either, but Bucky Irving, I feel like every year there's a Bucky Irving. There's a guy that's comes out of nowhere, has a great like second half to a season, and then he starts getting drafted in the second round. I wouldn't hate Bucky Irving. He was going in like the fourth, but like second round value or second round, cost plus, a new offensive coordinator. Like I just feel like, and there's still some decent talent there. I think Tucker's good. I think Rachaad White's decent enough. I think there's enough talent there where I also think the Buccaneers offense as a whole is going to regress a little bit. So I don't know, but Bucky Irving going at the 2-3 turn, I think to me is just super expensive. But a couple guys that I do like, they're all in the same range. And they're all kind of low for the same reason. I really like the Joe Mixon, James Conner, Alvin Kamara kind of range of guys, because I get it. They're all low because they're old and they're old news and it's not sexy, but handcuff these guys, man. I mean, we don't really necessarily, their handcuffs aren't incredible, but like we'll know, Kendra Miller, we'll kind of know who they are by August when we're really drafting. And if you go take like a Joe Mixon, like maybe it's Nick Chubb, like go get these guys. If they don't fall off a cliff, if they don't get hurt or completely fall off, which they might, they're hitting that age cliff, they're massive value. I mean, Joe Mixon's a top 10 running back every single year. And every year, the last couple of years, you can draft it as like RB20. So again, you can go get these guys. Kamara is like he was like a top 3 running back, 5 running back consistently. And then he catches 10 balls a game. Like, again, another guy that you can get him as RB in the 20-ish range. And if he's not hurt, he's going to be a top 5 to 7 running back. So if you're worried about injuries, go and draft their handcuff. And if you're worried about the offenses, well, that price is already baked in on where you're drafting them. So I really like that range of kind of older running backs.
Yeah, James Conner being a value, rinse and repeat.
Yeah,
every year.
Yep, exactly. And he's got a good handcuff. Like Conner, I love, because if Conner's going to play, if Conner does get hurt, which he used to all the time, Benson will be fine. Like I think people, again, they don't like to handcuff him, but if you go get Conner in let's say the 6th and Benson in the 10th or 11th, you're locked into an RB1. I think all season, depending.
I'm willing to take my shots on James Conner, but Trey Brinson, I wasn't impressed with what I saw last year, so maybe he just wasn't healthy. We'll see.
Yeah,
you can easily. It's not easy to. I mean, he's easy to acquire.
Yeah, exactly. The opportunity cost is low, but. All right, my friend. Hey, it was great talking running backs with you today. Again, congratulations on the top 2 ranking there at Fantasy Pros. Everybody go pick up your fantasy magazine, get it for the kids. I bought a couple copies. They're loving reading the articles. Hey, some great articles in here, your rankings in there, some really good expert mock drafts in there for everyone to check out. And we'll get together. I got a show coming Friday night, doing a live draft here, the Red versus Blue 2. So check that out. That'll be Friday night. I'll be drafting in that. And then, Jody, you and I will get back on together next week. We'll talk receivers. How does that sound?
Sounds good, buddy.
Beautiful. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Again, we recorded this early on Wednesday. We'll get it out to you this evening. And we'll see you guys next week.